Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for Careers Unlocked, the Great Refocus. My name is Shashma Bonet-Rook, and I'm a Future Students Faculty Partner here at UNSW Sydney. I am very fortunate and very excited to be joined tonight by two leaders in their fields who are going to share their tips and their insights with you on how to develop a meaningful career during what can only be described as really unprecedented times. So before we get started, I'd like to take time to acknowledge the Bedjigal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which the UNSW Kensington campus stands, which is where I'm coming to you from this evening. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders both past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us tonight. So let's meet our panel members. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Professor Timothy O'Leary. So Timothy is the head of the School of Humanities and Languages and a Professor of Philosophy at UNSW Sydney. He has research expertise in the field of European philosophy, ethics and literature, and has published extensively in this field. Prior to coming to UNSW, Timothy spent many years at the University of Hong Kong, where he ran a project on concepts of happiness in Chinese and Western philosophy. And according to my notes, Timothy still spends a lot of time thinking about things and their importance or lack of importance in a happy life. So welcome, Timothy.
Thank you very much, Shashma. Really pleasure to be here. And I do indeed continue to think about things and their importance, which maybe we'll talk about later on.
We absolutely will. I'm glad we've done our research. And my other guest this evening is Rohini Laxmanalal, who is a Senior Change Manager at Westpac and one of our alumni, having completed her Master of Organisational Psychology here at UNSW. Rohini uses a human-centred change management approach to visibly uplift organisational performance and people experience. And she successfully led business transformations across financial services, government and transport sectors. So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening, Rohini.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be part of this important conversation.
Fantastic. And of course, before we get started, I should add that we love to hear from the audience during these events. So please drop your comments and questions in the chat and we'll try to answer some of them at the end of our conversation. So with that, let's get started. So, Timothy and Rohini, it's clear that the coronavirus pandemic has led many individuals to really reevaluate the meaning of work in their lives. It's not only impacted how we get to work, where we work and how we do our work, but it's actually impacted how we feel about work. Obviously, I was really interested to read that the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the 2021 Labour Force Survey, suggests that over 600,000 Australians intend to change jobs in the next year. And of course, I think we've all heard of it referred to as the Great Resignation, among a number of things. So I guess I'd like to start by asking each of you to share your own perspectives on this phenomenon and based on your respective fields. Timothy, if I can start with you, could you share a little bit about your professional background and really, I guess, how you've seen the notion of the Great Resignation play out over the last 12 or so months?
Sure, Shashma, thank you. Well, look, I mean, there's so many threads that one can pull on here in this. I think one of the interesting things that's happened is that we've moved from talking about a great resignation to something a little more broad than that. We're talking here about a refocus. There are people relocating where they live and so on. So I think there's clearly a big shift happening in the way that people think about their work and the way they think about their work in relation to their lives. I see that in my own domain of work at the university, but I think one sees it happening in many places. Another interesting research, you mentioned one, and just last week, NAB, National Australia Bank, did a survey of something like 2,000 Australian employees. 1 in 5 of them said 1 in 5 of them had quit their jobs in the last 12 months. And of those people, 30% of them, they gave their top reason as a lack of personal fulfillment, purpose, or meaning in their job. So that's really interesting that 1/3 of people leaving their jobs are doing so because of a lack of purpose and meaning. And I think that proportion is interesting because here at the university, we've actually done research within UNSW and across the academic across the tertiary industry in Australia. And we found something very similar in 2020, that about almost 40% of people working at universities found a decrease in their job satisfaction due to COVID. But equally, almost 30% actually found an increase in their job satisfaction. So it's this really interesting phenomenon that what's happened with COVID, people working from home, reshifting their balance, it seems to have really helped a significant number of people, but also really negatively impacted a significant number of people. And I think what we're seeing today is just how that is playing out, especially now that we hopefully are coming out of COVID and beginning to have the possibility of returning to our workplaces. I think we will see how that unfolds. But definitely it's had an impact on the work-life balance, on sense of satisfaction, and I think more broadly on the sense that people have that sense of meaning and purposefulness in their work is now more important than ever. And that's something that's come out of this 2 years of really, let's face it, really traumatic experience for many, many people around the world. That has changed the way that people think, I think.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really interesting point, that some people have actually reported higher levels of satisfaction, and it talks to how different people get meaning from different facets and from different things in their lives. And I think it's an interesting point that you've made. We made definitely a deliberate decision to change the title from the Great Resignation to the Great Refocus, so that we could really acknowledge that it's not simply about the act of resignation, although some people might find happiness in that specific act, but that it's more about the motivations and what's actually driving us to look for that meaning and where we can seek it in our career. Rohini, I'm really interested to hear from yourself, and if you can tell us, I guess, a little bit about your professional role and similarly what you've witnessed over the last several months in regards to this Great Resignation, or as we've rephrased it tonight, the Great Refocus.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently working at Westpac Group as a senior change manager. I actually did my bachelor's degree at UNSW in psychology, and then went on to do organisational psychology as my master's. And then I kind of moved into management consulting, which kind of gave me a wide variety of disciplines as well as industry areas to explore, which was a great opportunity. So change management, organisational design, organisational development, but then also had opportunities to work within the financial service sector, transport sectors, retail, healthcare. And then, just decided to pursue change management. And then, for the last 3-4 years, have worked for some of the big four banks, particularly in the regulatory change space, but as well as some digital change projects. I'm glad that I've had that kind of varied experience across industry sectors and also across different areas of people consulting. But in terms of the way I've seen the Great Resignation play out, I completely agree with Timothy. I think that, the pandemic has really forced us to be a little bit more introspective, and look within ourselves to understand if we're actually fulfilling our purpose in our day-to-day work lives. But beyond that, I also think that we haven't quite seen the Great Resignation play out potentially as the US have seen it. So I guess the term was coined in the US. They'd seen a huge surge in resignation rates on the back of the pandemic. But I think what we're seeing now is a bit of a delay in job mobility. I think people were kind of forced to kind of bunker down in that first year of the pandemic. And there was a bit of hesitancy in moving, particularly in 2020 when market conditions were a bit more uncertain. And I think we're seeing now a bit of shift in power really to the employee. So I think it's giving employees a lot more bargaining power. Because unemployment rates are at an all-time low. We've got like around 4% unemployment rate back in January. So I think that's allowing employees to have the right conversations, with their leaders within their current roles, but then also when looking at different roles, understanding, how they can use that bargaining power to get a better opportunity elsewhere.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that obviously this sort of post-lockdown recovery is giving people the opportunity to explore their options. And I know Timothy has previously spoken as well about sort of, lockdowns and this sort of experience being an opportunity to reset and reevaluate. And I guess, Timothy, if we go back to you, I mean, is there, from a philosophical approach, why now, I guess? Why is it that people are sort of, what has changed, and why are people now willing to maybe take some of those risks to really prioritise what they're passionate about?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Shashma. Therefore, I don't have an easy answer to it. Exactly why? I mean, clearly it's to do with the COVID pandemic. As I said before, one of the things that we really cannot forget is that, at least globally, and for many people, it's been a really traumatic 2 years. It's been, again, research shows, extreme increases in stress levels people report, in anxiety levels people report, in mental health problems that people report, and pretty extreme decreases in people's reported overall happiness or satisfaction with their lives. So we've gone through that. About a year ago in Australia, maybe it looked like we were coming out of it, but then wham, it hit us again. We had 2 more waves since then. We have a Delta and Omicron. Now we're coming out of it. Who knows what's going to happen in the course of 2022? But I think it's really that experience, which is, it's the most significant globally shared experience, although obviously shared in different ways, yet a really significant global event, probably the first such event in the lifetimes of most people probably alive today. It's akin to World War II, World War I, kind of this thing we've all gone through together. And those events cause people to reevaluate. In this case, I think in particular, because in terms of work, the way it, because this one happened at this moment when it was technologically possible for us all, it turned out, to go home and do our work from home and yet see each other and talk to each other. And universities carried on operating, banks carried on operating. Severe impact on certain parts of the economy, of course, the service economy, the healthcare system, and so on. So I think that's the other thing to really be aware of, the differentiation on different groups of people. It's been disproportionately hard here in Australia, we've seen, on service workers, on healthcare workers, of course, around the world. One other thing I saw reported last week was that, I think it was a public health workers union, reported that something like 30% of their members said that they were planning to change their careers within the next 1 to 2 years. Now, that planning within 1 to 2 years, maybe what we see there obviously is a sense of burnout amongst healthcare workers, but also a sense of duty to stay with it until this has kind of been dealt with. But then people are thinking, then I will change, right? Because they've been through something, they don't think it's worth it. So I think in all sorts of different ways, that experience has led people in through different routes to thinking, hang on a second, do I really want to? I think many people are saying, I don't want to go back exactly to the way I was before. And employers are certainly recognizing that, as Rohini was saying, are thinking, it's very much the power is kind of shifting to the employees. There's a low unemployment rate. It's very much, well, how do you make my commute worth my while? You want me to go back to the office. You tell me it's important for cafes in the CBD, but really, you have to give me some reason to do this. So really the onus is on employers to say, look, come back to the office for these reasons. Otherwise, people are thinking, well, why don't I just move to, Bendigo, Ballarat, Byron Bay, or somewhere else, and either do the same job or do a different job?
Absolutely, and I think that that actually leads really well into the next question that I wanted to ask you, Rohini, which was about, I guess, in your role as a senior change manager and psychologist, you've obviously worked across a number of top-tier organisations. How are organisations responding to the changing needs of the employers, or employees rather? What are you seeing, and what are those responses that maybe we can expect or that we should expect?
Yeah, sure. So just in the last 2 years, I've really seen leaders make a lot more of an effort to kind of reevaluate their employee value propositions. So making that clear connection between what employees highly value and what they actually spend time doing at work. So I think companies are starting to communicate how working for them can actually connect to what they feel employees value through redefining their employee value propositions. So they're also starting to relook at some of their vision and mission statements and asking questions like, what kind of talent does our organisation need? What do we actually expect from employees in driving customer needs? How do we set ourselves apart from different competitors? And then really bringing employees in that journey on how to communicate that new employee value proposition to the broader organisation. So, using storytelling as examples of doing that. So celebrating successes within teams to highlight how a particular team has resolved a problem, and creating stories of impact in terms of how has that actually brought about positive change within customers or broader communities or shareholders, etc. And I know that, some of the work that I did at PwC, they actually really focused on, putting your EVP into action. And some of those key items that have come out from a recent white paper was really looking at some of the tangible and also intangible action items that leaders within organisations can take to redesign how people come back into the workforce post the pandemic. So some of the tangible items were looking at remuneration and rewards. So what kind of financial incentives do you have in place, bonuses, subsidies on goods and services, etc., for your employees? How do we design the physical workspaces that employees are coming back to post the pandemic, while also kind of maintaining COVID-safe guidelines, but then also enhancing collaboration in those environments? How do we provide employees certain perks working from home, any sort of rebates or subsidies on, desktops, laptops, tables, computer chairs, etc. And then also focusing on well-being. I think burnout's been a common theme with working from home and all the extended hours that we've had to contend with, taking on additional responsibilities, and then also that kind of merge between work and home and there not being a clear divide has definitely increased the amount of hours we're spending working from home. So, looking at your wellbeing programs, what kind of physical health programs that you have as well to make sure employees are moving and mobile through their workday and are taking significant breaks. And then, career development opportunities are some of those tangible items. But then there's also, importantly, those intangible items like ways of working. So how do we actually get work done around here? How do we promote flexible ways of working? How do we promote collaboration through the use of technology? And then how do the employees actually experience their role through the broader organisational culture? How do we increase diversity in the workforce? Even to Timothy's point, how are we making sure that, our employee and workforce isn't just, primarily based in the CBD. People in rural areas now have opportunities to actually work for organisations that have their home offices based in the CBD. And then more importantly, what are we doing for our brand and reputation? So looking at social and corporate responsibility and how companies can create value for customers post this pandemic.
And if I can stay with you for a moment, Rohini, I guess I'm interested from, employees. We've talked about potentially a number of employees wanting, reevaluating their skills, potentially wanting to upskill or to learn new skills, to look at adding that value. How can people start to have those conversations with their employers? I think, if someone's considering doing additional studies, starting postgraduate, whether it be to shift careers or whether it be to actually build their skills in an area they're passionate about, that can be quite daunting. Where do you start in having that discussion with your employer?
Yeah, sure. I think, first finding your values takes a lot of introspection, and you've kind of got to remove ego out of the question there, because sometimes when you're looking at your values, you're looking at, okay, how do these resonate with my family, with my friends, with my peers, with my co-workers? So I think that first step is really being clear on your values, and then when you are having these conversations with your people leaders, your managers, it's important to kind of tie it back to outcomes and productivity at the end of the day. So if you value, for example, work-life balance and, working from home on a more regular basis, you could argue to your people leader or manager that, I want to maintain working from home 3 to 4 days a week and willing to come into the office one day a week. However, in my general commute to the office, which is a 2-hour commute, I can actually increase productivity by, getting up earlier in the morning and, progressing with work earlier, but then clocking off earlier within the day because I need to do school pickup or whatnot. So it's about kind of understanding your values, but then also making sure that they resonate with the business, and you're kind of communicating those productivity gains and gains to the bottom line as well to your manager, so that they understand the value in making sure that your values are actually being addressed through your day-to-day work. And even, if you value, upskilling and growth, you could be taking on some additional courses outside of work and then communicating to your manager, look, I'm going to take this additional course. It might take some time off work, but then I can come back and share some of those critical takeaways and learnings with the rest of the team. And I can share some of those insights more broadly, which again is a benefit for the broader team. So it's, connecting your values with outcomes, essentially.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rohini. I think that's really valuable, tangible advice for people who want to have those discussions. Timothy, I want to go back to you with another big question, I suppose.
Thank you, Shashma. It's a big one.
They're always big, aren't they? I guess, okay, so when we talk about the search for meaning through work, I guess, what are we really looking for? Do you think that we can ever find that perfect career or workplace to sustain us?
Look, that's a great question, Shashma, and being a big question, there's no simple answer to it. I guess, look, there's a couple of things I would say. First of all, I don't think, at least I think it would be unusual for a person to get all of their meaning and purpose in their life from their job or their career. And I think, arguably that's actually a trap that one should probably avoid falling into. I think having the balance between, when people talk about a work-life balance or work-family balance, it's really in that context of recognizing that work, your entire life cannot be your work, or at least for most people, it's not, and usually that's not an ideal situation to be in. So, of course, there are other sources. That can be family, it can be other things in one's life that one gets that meaning from. So there has to be a balance. There's no ideal job for getting it. The other thing I would say to address that would be that, we might be inclined to think, or people might be inclined to think, that some jobs are kind of inherently more meaningful than other jobs. So, if you ask someone, or just off the top of your head, tell me a meaningful career, and they might say nursing, teaching, medicine, saving people's lives and so on. But I guess what I would say is that, it's not necessarily the case that there are certain jobs that have all the meaning and other jobs that have no meaning, or are certain jobs that can give you meaning and purpose and other jobs that cannot give you meaning and purpose. I think, the nature of human meaning and human purpose is that one creates it oneself in the environment in which one is living. So it's not given in the job or in the thing. It's something that we generate ourselves through that interaction with our careers and with other people and so on. So, you can find really profound meaning for you out of the career, let's say, of being an advertising executive, or out of the career of being an intensive care nurse. Okay, they can be equally meaningful for you, or they can be equally lacking in meaning for a person. Right? And what we might be seeing with people in the healthcare professions is actually saying, look, I can't do this one anymore. I need to find a different way to do it. So I think that's really important to just, I would discourage people from, or I would encourage people not to think that, because of my career, I'll never find any meaning in it. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. On the other hand, if one is feeling that, really kind of tired or kind of at the end of that purpose, feeling lacking that sense of purpose and that sense of meaning in a career. I mean, just following up on some of what Rohini was saying, I think, there are many opportunities in one's current job, usually, to begin the steps towards that new thing. It's not necessarily that you need to cut all ties today and be unemployed tomorrow and then start from scratch. I think you can begin steps towards that alternative path before you leave the current path you're on. And that's probably a much less anxiety producing way to do it, much more secure way to do it. It's much safer for you and your, financial stability and family stability and so on. You mentioned I worked in Hong Kong. I was at the University of Hong Kong for many years. I actually did a professional degree in counseling while I was, an associate professor in philosophy at Hong Kong. And the university supported me in that, even to the extent of partially paying my fees for that, because they could see the value of that for that job. I might have used it to shift career, but in the end I didn't. But nonetheless, it shows that, quite often these can overlap, basically. Your explorations of new possibilities can overlap with your current one. So I guess that's, we find meaning in all sorts of different ways. It can never be totally from our career, but the range of careers from which we can find meaning, I think, is really, it's as many careers actually as there are. In fact, if it fits for you, yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because there are certain careers or certain industries that we might associate more with that, that they have a greater responsibility or they give more back. But certainly from our perspective, we've seen a number of people choosing to complete a postgraduate qualification that will help them make a real difference in the world. But that might be in a number of different ways. So we have seen people wanting to shift careers, but we've also had people looking just to gain skills that can help them create more social value through their existing roles. And that's something that helps them sort of bring that value and that purpose to what they're doing every day. I guess that leads me to my next question, which I wanted to ask you, Rohini, and it goes back, I guess, to, this notion of starting again, I suppose, or people who have actually decided, look, after everything, I need a shift, I need a change. But how can people overcome, I guess, some of the fear of starting at entry level after spending, possibly a long time climbing the ladder in one particular field?
Yeah, sure. I think Timothy actually brought up a really great point about, do you actually need to start from scratch and, completely change roles or industries? So I think, you've got to work with what you have first. So, do your research, understand what kind of skills and qualifications and on-the-job experience that you actually need to succeed in a different industry or role, and leverage your existing network to actually do that. So have conversations with managers within the role that you're already in. You might even know people already in that industry that you can talk to. People on LinkedIn are incredibly friendly and open to having a coffee, hopefully post-pandemic now, and a chat about what their experience has been like in their industry, what kind of skills and qualifications you need. So if you're clear on, what kind of skills you need to uplift, and then putting together a bit of an action plan around that, I think that is a good foundation to have these conversations, not just within the current role that you're in with your, peers and your managers, to find out if there's any opportunities in-house before you actually, take that leap. Because you've also got that benefit that management kind of know the quality of the work that you produce and some of the outputs that you've already produced, and the value that you've created in your current role as well. So, using your current manager as a good reference point, obviously having that conversation first so that they're actually aware that you're wanting to kind of explore other areas within the business, is always helpful. But, the big four banks are a great place to do that as well. I mean, I've had experience now within the consumer space, within business bank, across digital and regulatory initiatives, and majority of those opportunities have actually come about through my networks and referrals. So yeah, just start small and take gradual steps before you kind of make that big leap.
Great. And I think, that advice, it's an opportunity to explore options and to really have those different experiences, which can often open up new things that you may have not realised that you actually have a real passion for, and to discover those different areas. Now, I'm conscious of time. It has gone very quickly, so I want to use the last few minutes to respond to some of the questions from our audience. So firstly, thank you so much to everyone who has submitted their questions in the chat. Some of them I think we have already responded to as we've gone through our conversation, but I can see a couple here. The first one is directed to yourself, Rohini. The question is, so as a psychologist, can you share any tools or psychometric tests that you would recommend to help me work out which career direction I should take?
Yeah, sure. So if you're kind of wondering what careers appeal to you, I'd probably recommend the Myers-Briggs type indicator as a good psychometric assessment. So it essentially looks at some of your personality traits and compartmentalizes it into 16 different typologies. And then it can kind of give you a little bit more insight into what kind of work environment that would best fit your personality. I think UNSW Careers is also a good resource if you're looking for, additional insights there in terms of what jobs what strengths you currently have, and then what jobs would play to those strengths. They've got career coaching sessions that not only help students with job advice and career planning, but also just more practical applications of writing cover letters, resumes, how to prepare for interview and seminars. And then another psychometric test that's quite useful is the Moresby profile, which is a little bit more intensive. It looks at 12 separate assessments measuring your mental function, personality, and I think the other two tests actually measure manual dexterity as well. So it's a bit more of a comprehensive profile. I think it takes around 3 hours or so, but a lot more intensive there. And some of these, so the MBTI, for example, is free to use. So I would recommend that as a starting point. And it's, free to access by students just wanting to understand what kind of work environment would best suit their personality type.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rohini. There's some great tools and resources there that you've shared. The next question I'd like to pose to you, Timothy, and as you acknowledged, I guess, earlier, there are a number of people who have actually experienced significant burnout over the last sort of 2 years. And so our audience member is sort of, worried that acting on this feeling to leave my job might actually be a mistake. And I guess the question is, what other ways can I find more meaning in my life? And, how do I know when it's the right time to act on those feelings?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really great question, and it's completely understandable, of course, that it brings a great deal of anxiety. I think to some extent we've addressed some of that earlier by saying that, look, for a career change, it doesn't need to be one huge leap into the unknown. You can actually overlap that to a great extent with your current career and your current position of stability, assuming hopefully you have such a position. So that's one thing to say, is that you can do it step by step. I think another thing, though, one thing I was thinking about when Rohini was talking about the various tools, and I've done Myers-Briggs a few times. I can never remember what my 4-letter personality type is. So there's a quiz, maybe people could guess what it is. I do not recall. But look, another thing that one could do, and in fact, again, share a personal experience. Just last week, somebody suggested to me a couple of weeks ago that, well, how about you do some volunteering, just to get back into kind of social world and people and so on. And I finally, the other day, I think this past weekend, I looked online, New South Wales volunteering kind of portal, to look at what kinds of options are there and what could I do? What kinds of things could I do? And there's an extraordinary range of things that one can get involved in. And just in the context of what Rohini was saying, I was thinking, just a few of them that stood out to me would actually be really good ways of testing out whether or not you really are suited to certain kinds of careers. So there's one of them organized by an education foundation. And it's kind of, you get some training and you teach within primary school programs, teaching ethics, very broadly conceived, right? This is an alternative to the religious studies component in primary schools. That's something that, first of all, is inherently meaningful. People would find it meaningful. Secondly, it might tell you, how do I enjoy working, for instance, with children, right, in an educational establishment, or does that fill me with horror? And am I really no good at it? You'll get to find that out very, very quickly. Another one I was looking at also in schools was mentoring. So this was mentoring for high school kids in various stages of kind of being a little bit troubled in their academic progression, or maybe from family background. Again, organized by a not-for-profit, schemes in various high schools around Sydney. They give some training, you mentor. I mentioned that I had done a postgraduate degree in counseling. If that was something that you were thinking about, you can easily do this kind of volunteering, which, again, inherently meaningful and gives you a sense of whether or not you enjoy that, whether you find it fulfilling. And another one, a little bit more kind of out there, was there were several regional positions for volunteers in various small museums, things like the Railway Museum in some little town somewhere, or the local museums. Now, it's maybe a more niche market, but if somebody was thinking about, I want to get into kind of cultural institution, maybe you're thinking about doing a master's in curatorship or museum studies. There's lots of ways for you to find out right now what's that experience like working in that. You do that, as I said, it's inherently meaningful itself, and it gives you that sense of whether or not, it's kind of like trying stuff out, and you'll get to have a better sense of whether or not it's kind of for you and whether you want to pursue it further. So there's a few ideas.
Absolutely. I know it's incredible that, the number and the breadth of volunteering options that are out there and that can help you sort of understand where you can sort of, find that value and that meaning, and whether that might translate into a future career. We have time for one more audience question. So I might pose this one to you, Rohini. And again, it is a big question, and we've touched on some of it. But I guess the question is, if you could provide a step-by-step guide for creating a more purposeful, value-led career, where should I start?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I recently stumbled upon is a Japanese concept which really resonated with me, called ikigai. So it's all about, I think it translates to English to your reason for being. So it actually looks at 4 different components, some of them intrinsic, some of them extrinsic. So I think the intrinsic ones are, do what you love. So a good marker of that is kind of being in that flow state. So when you're completely unaware of what's going on around you and you're kind of in the zone, and the day kind of just passes you by without you even looking at the clock. I think that's a good indication of, do what you love, and you're completely dedicated and focused to the task at hand, and then do what you're good at. So look at really your strengths. Where have you succeeded in past roles? What's the kind of feedback that you've got from previous co-workers and managers in terms of where your strengths lie? And then look at some of those extrinsic factors as well. So doing what the world needs. So looking at your broader purpose and your contribution to the broader community and society. And then obviously something that's a little bit more practical is do what you can actually be rewarded for. So you've obviously got to make a living out of your job. So I like the fact that it kind of brings those intrinsic and extrinsic factors into a neat way of thinking about, creating that more purposeful, value-led career. So do what you love, do what you're good at, do what the world needs, and do what you can be rewarded for.
I love it. And find the flow state. That's what that's going to be my mantra for the year ahead. Find the flow state. Absolutely. Now, we're nearly to the end of this evening's session, but I guess I'd like to finish by asking each of you one last question. And in many ways, it may be something that you've already touched on. But perhaps I'll start with you, Timothy. If you could leave our audience this evening with one top tip for finding more meaning through work, what would that be?
Whoa, that's really put me on the spot, Shashma. After all that, one top tip for finding the meaning at work. I think the top tip would be, again, a little bit following from what Rohini was saying. You really have to think about what things are meaningful for you. Okay, so the meaning is not there sitting in the work. The meaning is actually in an interaction between you and the work. So to understand that or to explore that, you're really going to have to think about what is important to you. What are your values? What do you want to achieve? And then think about, to what extent is this job or this career helping you to achieve those? Hopefully, you'll find that it's helping very strongly to help you to achieve them. Otherwise, you'll begin to think about having a shift in that or making some change. But I think that's it. I think it's about looking inwards. And that's really what, COVID, I think, has done for many people. It's forced, many people have been isolated for long periods of time. This forces introspection. So I think that's what's, again, bringing it back to the Great Refocus, that's been happening. People are doing that inward examination and they're questioning that. So I think that's what you need to do.
Very, very good advice. And Rohini, I'll ask you the same question. If you could leave one top tip for finding more meaning through work, based on your experience and expertise, what would it be?
I think for me, it would be, just take the time to actually reflect. I think in the busy world that we live in today, we rarely take that time to kind of take a step back and reflect and be a little bit more introspective with, where our passion lies, what are our core values, and how do we want to bring that into the world of work. And secondly, I just love that Japanese model, that Ikigai model, because it looks at, what your core passions are, but then also making it realistic and practical to execute. So I think it's important to bridge that gap between, okay, what do I really love doing, but then will it create, the outcomes that I want, not just within the broader community, but for myself, for my family, etc. So, I think those are the two key takeaways for me.
Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful point to end tonight's discussion. And look, I just really want to say thank you to Rohini and to Timothy for sharing your insights and your advice with us tonight. I think we've heard so much about sort of this great resignation in the media and in many different forums, but I think it's been really interesting to unpack it and look at it in a different light this evening and what it means in regards to refocusing and finding value in what we do. So thank you again for being part of tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Shashma. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you, of course, to everyone who has joined us in the audience this evening. I really hope you've enjoyed the discussion as much as I have. And what we've left you with is really some helpful and inspiring insights and some actions that you can take away and consider. And of course, if this event has got you thinking about further study or any options regarding reskilling or upskilling, please do connect with us. You can always reach out to explore your options via phone, email, or chat. So on behalf of myself and UNSW, we hope to see you again at another event soon, or perhaps even on campus one day in the near future. So thank you so much, everyone, and good night.
You're the person the world needs. You may not know how or why yet, but you know you're here to make a difference. Few people have great ideas. Even fewer make them happen. It takes a dreamer, a researcher, a leader, a thinker. It takes someone like you.